Welcome everyone, Costin here with a discussion about the Dark Elves in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. Out of the races that have made the transition from Warhammer 2 into Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires, I would say the Dark Elves are one of the best races in the game. And unlike the High Elves or Wood Elves, they actually work quite well given the way the meta is of Immortal Empires. When Immortal Empires came out, there were a bunch of people who had played quite a bit of Dark Elves in Warhammer 2 that weren't really happy with the design decisions behind the Dark Elves in Immortal Empires. But I have to say that even at the launch of Immortal Empires, they were actually in quite a good position. Then the Chaos Dwarfs came out, instant construction was added in, and the Dark Elves got some changes over there, partly because of the criticism they had received initially with regards to their slave system. There are still people who really dislike the way the slave system works for the Dark Elves, but I want to be very clear on something. Regardless of how some people feel about the slave system between Warhammer 2 and Warhammer 3, it is undeniable that the Dark Elves are one of the best suited races in the game for the meta of Warhammer 3. There are a couple of other races, Dwarves, Skaven, Empire, after Thrones of Decay, but Dark Elves, even though they haven't gotten any kind of DLC, are in an amazing place. And again, the best place out of all the Elven factions. I'll talk about the Wood Elves later on. So let's consider the situation that the Dark Elves have to deal with, or any race has to deal with. Warhammer 3 campaigns are played at a fairly rapid pace. And so being able to access all kinds of different units, heroes, is actually not just a significant advantage, but also makes campaigns far more interesting to deal with, because, so let's be clear on this, having access to a wider variety of units, of heroes, does make for more interesting campaigns. Sure, you can win campaigns very effectively with the High Elves if you just spam their tier 1 units. And just going to point this out, one of the problems of the High Elves, you might say, oh, but you have different options of unit recruitment. Cavalry doesn't work because sieges and other units that you could use, well, they're higher tier, or by Alliance of Crix, which is the only real option that is available that would work well given the battle meta, if you will. The problem is, one, they're tier 3, and the second issue is cost. You need cost-effective armies because you do have potentially a good amount of territory to deal with. And this is where the Dark Elves shine in multiple ways. So, first off, unit roster issues, hero issues. Dark Elves have access to a significant number of heroes very quickly. If you have the DLC, you get access through Masters, the Malice Darkblade DLC, which also contains Niche, which I would recommend as the DLC. But you get access to Masters, not just recruitment, but also capacity at tier 2. That is fairly significant enough. And then you also have access to Dev Hags and K-Knight Assassins at tier 3, and Sorceresses as well at tier 3. In minor settlements, you can also get these heroes, with the exception of Sorceresses. So Sorceresses would require you to get a provincial capital, but everything else only you can increase in minor settlements. This is actually significant, not just because you have a lower tier of recruitment needed for these heroes, but because you can use the minor settlements, it means you can get a lot of heroes very quickly. I feel like one of the problems that we have in Warhammer 3 is the way that certain races increase hero capacity. Some have a really good way of increasing hero capacity by default, others do it through short campaign victory conditions, like the High Elves. But the problem with that is when you attach that to a campaign victory condition, and it's designed around that, then it means that by the time you can actually get a decent amount of heroes, you've pretty much won the campaign. It is interesting to think, though, about the Empire and Dwarves who have both the victory condition benefit and also can increase hero capacity very easily in their regular settlements. So it's not necessarily special at this point that Dark Elves have all these heroes at tier 3. Far from it. Moravi is the exception. She can't gain as many assassins, but she can gain more sorceresses. So there is the kind of trade-off that she does have in her campaign. Besides, she starts with the Knight assassin, so if you're worried about that, that's not really too big of a problem. But on top of that, let's consider the Dark Elven roster of units. At tier 1, you have spearmen, you have sword and shield infantry, you have crossbows. Already you have 3 different units that have different purposes. Spearmen hold the line, swordsmen deal damage. Well, as much as a one-handed swordsman does damage, though Dark Elven units do have pretty good melee capability, and crossbowmen do range damage. At tier 2, you have Witch Elves, you have Shades, you have Dark Riders and Dark Riders who repeat their crossbows, and then at tier 3, you have Dark Riders with shields, artillery, Black Ark Corsairs, and Sisters of Slaughter. And also Scourge Runner chariots. And Bloodwrack Medusa. This is genuine unit variety. Because a lot of these units, with the exception of the cavalry, to be certain, the Doomfire Warlocks are not something to be laughed at because they are kind of ridiculous in how much they debuff an enemy. But the actual variety here is great. Until tier 3, think of this. Being able to access this many these kind of different units who have different purposes. You have good melee infantry. You have hybrid infantry. You have ranged infantry of different kinds, like Dark Shards just being stand-up ranged infantry, or Shades who can stalk in a battlefield. All of these work differently and have a different purpose on the battlefield. So you do have that greater variety in your campaign. But there's more. Not only do you have that greater variety, you also have a much easier access to said variety because you do have that capability of instant construction. So for instance, over here, I have Nagrand, and it is turn 10, and I can recruit every hero type that the Dark Elves have access to. So one of the benefits of the Dark Elves is you can use slaves for the sake of instant construction. But not just instant construction. You also have these dictats. You can print money, you can grow, you can get control. The growth benefit combined with instant construction allows you easier access to this. On top of that, you can also earn a significant amount of money through regular settlement buildings. You do need slaves, so you do have a bit of a balancing act. But as long as you have, more than 100 slaves or so in a campaign, you will not, overall, as long as you have like 100 to 200 slaves, you will typically not have an issue unless you're spending more than 100 to 200 per turn, right? So as long as you can maintain enough slaves for one turn, you can always earn enough slaves for the next turn. This is great. And this is one of the things that helps them out in terms of that variety. Already, the Dark Elves would be in a great position for the sake of variety inherently because of their units here and heroes. But you add on top of that the slave system, for all the criticisms people have with it. You add on top of that slave system, it ends up being better. But then on top of all of that, you also have Black Ark recruitment. So you can recruit when you get your first Black Ark, which you can get fairly quickly in a couple of turns. Especially if you focus on it. Helps to have a starting port like Malekith does, so, Hellebrand has some issues with that. But Black Arks replace your global recruitment. So Dark Elves do not have the encamp stance, which is a bit of a problem for them. But they do have the ability of recruiting from Black Arks. So Black Arks themselves are a mobile army. They can attack. Their generals are actual generals. Not as good as land generals, but very importantly, they can attack coastal settlements. And furthermore, because you can recruit Black Ark Corsairs, which are a tier 3 unit, from these as tier 1, they also benefit from the fact that they do reduce upkeep by 50% by default. So you can recruit a lot of units, because every type of unit can be recruited on Black Ark, provided you spend the surplus points on the structure. You can get various benefits over here for a Black Ark Corsair, for the Black Arks. and have even greater variety from the very beginning of your campaign, or very close to the beginning of your campaign. This is significant. The downside, of course, is you don't necessarily have the kind of scalability other factions have, and you don't necessarily have the highest tier units that are really, really good. Because, yeah, you know, Blood Rack Shrines, Black Dragons, pretty solid units, but Cold One Dread Knights, kind of whatever, right? Like, yeah, the higher tiers do leave something to be desired for the Dark Elves, undeniably so. But because the way the game is played, it doesn't necessarily matter as much. So you can play with a wide variety of units. Sure, you might be incentivized to go with a lot of Dread Spears, Black Arc Corsairs, Dark Shards, and some repeater bolt throwers, but you do have the ability of going with much, much more than that, and having a lot of armies to deal with the situation. So it is effective. It's not only just variety, it's cost-effective variety of units in a campaign. Their research tree is pretty okay. I would dare say not necessarily the best in the world, but, you know, it gets the job done. It gives you various benefits and improves your Black Arc growth over here with upgrade 1, 2, and 3. So you do have those kind of benefits with the research tree. It's okay. It's not special. I think like some changes could be made over there, but it's very workable as far as traditional research trees go in the game. And let me tell you, there are many research trees for many races that don't work anywhere near as good. So those are very significant strengths that the Dark Elves do have that add variety in their campaigns in terms of their units, roster, potential, capabilities, and just having fun in battles. Those are very substantial benefits with them. But on top of that, and this may surprise some people, but the Dark Elves are actually really good at diplomacy in a campaign compared to, you know, Wood Elves or or High Elves. I'm not sure exactly why my reliability is very low over here. I could guess on it, but I have no idea. I suspect I may have broken certain agreements I shouldn't have. But still, here's the thing about this. When we're looking at diplomacy, one of the things that matters a lot is aversion. And yes, certain races hate you, but almost no one deeply hates you. Like, I'm talking here minus 100 aversion, except the High Elves. But that's fine because your victory conditions do generally require that you wipe them out. At least the long campaign victory conditions do require you to do that. So it isn't necessarily a problem. But because you can get along well with pretty much everyone else, or not necessarily get along the best, but because your aversion is manageable, within manageable levels, that gives you a lot of potential in terms of your campaign diplomacy. Like some of the things I've done with Morathi, for instance, in a campaign have been absolutely ridiculous. Like, for instance, in one campaign I was playing as Morathi, I unified half the world in a vast network of alliances to deal with various other races. And furthermore, while Dark Elven campaigns are focused on the idea of taking Ulthuan, again, victory conditions, Malekith in particular having to wipe out Tyrion for sure campaign. But here's the thing. For Malekith, it's a nice benefit to get free recruit rank. For Tyrion, it actually sucks having to wipe out Malekith, not because it's so difficult, but because free hero capacity is a pretty damn substantial thing, and you will certainly reach the settlement threshold long before you wipe out Malekith. Unless you possibly rush him, and even then, I will probably wager that you're likely going to reach that 30 settlements threshold long before that. So just kind of something worth pointing out with respect to it. One of the problems. It is an issue for Malekith to be sure as well, but not quite on the same level over there. But climate situation, it depends on a campaign by campaign basis. But the fact that you do have, say, Chaos Wasteland in a pretty decent spot, the fact that you have Ulthuan, and the fact that you have so much money in instant construction means it doesn't necessarily matter. Hells may have scalable economy, but you just have an inherent baseline economy that's really, really good. And trade and all other things are just secondary to that aspect. So you have a great deal of choices. You can play campaigns in very different ways. Like, consider Malekith. You don't have to fight Grombrindle. There is no reason to do so. Like, Grombrindle wants to fight Malekith if you're playing him, various objectives. But if you're playing Malekith, you can be best friends with Grombrindle if you want in a campaign. Feels a bit weird, but you can do it. Absolutely. And those kind of choices and the ability of making those choices is one of the strengths in Dark Elven campaigns. Like, for instance, consider Lokir. One of the natural things you might think that you should do as Lokir is ally snitch and blow up Cafe. But you don't have to do that, in point of fact. There is no inherent reason to have to be forced to do that. In fact, you can easily, just as easily, ally Cafe and fight Snitch and save Cafe. Like, just ally Cafe, ally the forces of order if you want to do so. So that is what I'm talking about with having well-designed campaigns, or not necessarily well-designed campaigns, rather a well-designed race that works well within the meta of Warhammer 3. Now, I do believe the dwarves fit in far better because they have greater variety that they have access to, and their objectives certainly make them better. But I do believe that Dark Elves are one of the best races in the game to play. Skaven, most balanced because they have strengths and weaknesses. Dark Elves have a lot of strengths, and whatever weaknesses they do have, like higher end roster issues, it doesn't matter. Because again, campaigns are over in the early game, especially when you're playing a very aggressive race as the Dark Elves, compared to, say, the High Elves. But the problem is with that notion is that, yes, it's fine if theoretically if certain races are not ultra aggressive, but the issue is the best way to play the game as any race, High Elves, Dark Elves, Wood Elves, doesn't matter. It is to be highly aggressive. Some are just better at it and work better within that meta and give you a better campaign experience for it. Now, what is the principal downside? Because there is a very significant downside with the Dark Elves. The biggest problem is that their Legendary Lord campaigns aren't really that great. Basically, Morath, there's not as much differentiation between them as it should be. Part of the problem is that the two paid DLC campaigns are not really interesting at all, and those are Hellbrand, Malice, Darkblade. Like, you might think, oh, Malice Darkblade, he generates objectives. Yeah, Malice Darkblade is a boring as dirt campaign. Sure, he's very powerful, but he's nowhere near as interesting as any of the others. Like, I would rather play Hellbrand than play Malice Darkblade, and that's saying a lot. And while you supposedly have all these campaigns with different starting positions, the reality is you're always gunning for Wolf 1. It is worse in some ways than the High Elves, though in the High Elf situation it is the same problem, that you're always gunning for Wolf 1 and Nagrand. That's the same situation in Dark Elf campaign one way or another. I mean, Rakarth and Lokir literally have the ability of getting Karen Carr in their campaign through Confederation. They have an event on that. And Malice Darkblade is allied to Malekith and has long-term objectives similar to him, so you're always going to end up dealing with High Elves, and you're always going to end up dealing with Ulfwan. And I think that is the biggest downside to deal with in a Dark Elven campaign, that while the race in itself is great, the actual campaigns and their individuality is not up there, even compared to the High Elves. Let alone something like Draika compared to, say, playing Orion. Or Sisters versus playing Orion, Durfo, or Draika. So there is not that kind of variety between the Legendary Lord campaigns. That is the biggest downside. But as a race, they work very well. I just wish that their campaigns worked better, or had more variety in them, really. That would be my perspective and my conclusion on this. Costin here signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications. Stay tuned for more.